The mission was clear, or at least that's what Jack Lucky Lancaster kept telling himself as he tightened the straps of his old weathered M1 Garand. The steel was cold beneath his fingers, but it felt like home, like the countless battles he'd fought over the years, both in this galaxy and the one before. His team of mercenaries, a ragtag mix of humans and aliens, were gathered around the command center, listening intently as their client outlined the plan. Jack was barely paying attention. He didn't need to hear the details. He had his rifle, and that was all that mattered. Of course, no one else seemed to share his enthusiasm for the old gun. The rest of the team, particularly the alien mercenaries, eyed it with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Their weapons were sleek, shiny, and made of materials Jack couldn't even pronounce. Plasma rifles, energy shields, personal cloaks. Tech so advanced it looked like something out of one of those sci-fi flicks Jack used to watch as a kid. He'd often joke about how they looked like a bunch of overgrown space tourists, all shiny and smooth, with no idea how to really handle themselves in a fight. "Seriously, Jack, why bring a relic to a gunfight?" muttered Vrentak, a Zorithian mercenary. His antennae twitched as he gestured to Jack's rifle. "That thing belongs in a museum, not a battlefield." Jack grinned, not at all bothered. "Guess that's why it's still standing while you guys are all worried about your plasma cells running out." He slapped the M1 Garand's woodstock affectionately. "This old girl's never let me down." The other mercenaries, Vrentak's fellow Zorithians, snickered. There was no malice in their laughter, just the usual underestimation they'd all grown accustomed to. But Jack had learned long ago that the best way to deal with alien arrogance was to roll with it. Make them underestimate you, and then hit them where it hurt. "We've got a job to do," Vrentak continued, eyeing Jack's rifle one more time. "But when it's over, you better let me try out that antique. I'm sure it'll give me a laugh." Jack just winked. "Sure thing, if you survive long enough to try it." He didn't need to say more. The point was made. Vrentak could mock him all he wanted, but Jack knew the truth. All the plasma rifles in the universe wouldn't help the Zorithians if they couldn't adapt on the fly. Humans were adaptable. Humans made do with what they had. That was their greatest strength. And in a way, it made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The mission briefing wrapped up, and the team suited up. There wasn't much to say. They were professionals. They'd fought alongside one another before, and each knew their big role. For Jack, that role was simple: provide fire support. And maybe, just maybe, he'd proved that an old gun could do more than anyone thought. The atmosphere in the hangar was tense but not unfriendly. A mix of quiet banter and the occasional crackle of comms filled the air as everyone double-checked their gear. Jack didn't bother with anything fancy. His helmet was scratched, his body armor scuffed from years of use. Nothing new there. He wasn't interested in looking good. He was interested in getting the job done. His mind was already running through scenarios, considering angles, routes, contingencies. He didn't need the Zorithians to babysit him. He didn't even need their fancy weapons. Jack wasn't sure if that was what bothered the aliens most about him. He didn't act like the other humans they'd encountered. He wasn't caught up in the idea of proving his worth or fitting in. In fact, he was perfectly content to let them all believe he was just an old soldier with a sentimental attachment to outdated tech. They'd learn soon enough. As the team loaded into the transport ship, Jack found himself seated beside Vrentak, the Zorithian mercenary who'd made the most noise about his rifle. He wasn't much for small talk, but Jack wasn't the type to let silence linger. He shot Vrentak a look. "You ever been to Earth?" he asked casually, leaning back in his seat. Vrentak's eyes narrowed. "Why would I go there?" Humans are primitive," Jack chuckled. "We may be primitive, but we know how to throw a party. You'd be amazed at the kind of chaos a simple barbecue can cause." He grinned, enjoying the look of confusion on the alien's face. Vrentak didn't respond, but Jack didn't mind. He wasn't after a conversation. He was just letting his mind wander, thinking about how things used to be, about simpler times. His thoughts drifted back to when he first picked up the M1 Garand, back in the day when the world was still simple and soldiers had clear enemies, clear goals. Now everything was murky. Everyone had their own agenda. That's why Jack stuck with the basics. His rifle was reliable. It had no pretense, no high-tech gizmos to break or malfunction at the worst possible moment. The ship shuddered as it entered, the atmosphere of the target planet. Jack's stomach did a little flip, the kind of feeling he'd gotten used to over the years. A part of him was always ready for the worst, but that was just another part of being human. Always on edge, always ready to adapt, to survive. The target facility came into view, a sprawling complex surrounded by high-tech defenses and massive walls. The plan was simple. Get in, plant explosives, get out. But as they approached the landing zone, something felt off. Jack didn't have time to dwell on it. His instincts kicked in, and he was already checking the ammo in his rifle. "Ready for this, Lucky?" Brentak asked with a sly grin, clearly hoping to see Jack make a fool of himself. Jack just winked. "More than ready. You just worry about those plasma rifles of yours, Brentak. Leave the old gun to me." The transport descended, and the doors opened. The planet's heat hit them immediately, the thick, humid air stinging their lungs. Jack squinted against the harsh light. He wasn't a fan of this climate, but it didn't matter. There were more important things at stake. As the team disembarked, Jack's thoughts were focused solely on the mission. But somewhere deep down, a small part of him couldn't wait to see the look on Brentak's face when the old gun did exactly what it was designed to do. The Zorithians made their way forward, confident in their high-tech weaponry. Jack followed, his eyes scanning the perimeter. He wasn't expecting an easy fight. Nothing was ever easy. But the more he watched the aliens move, the more certain he became of one thing. They were in for a surprise. The old gun wasn't just a relic. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't the most advanced one. He slung the M1 Garand over his shoulder and began walking toward the complex, his steps steady and sure. The aliens followed, unaware that in a few hours they'd be questioning everything they thought they knew about combat. And as Jack stepped into the shadows of the facility, the first shot rang out, proving that sometimes the past wasn't as obsolete as it seemed. The night grew tense as the mercenaries approached the outer perimeter of the target facility. Jack Lancaster kept his eyes forward, his mind focused. The M1 Garand, slung over his shoulder, felt like an old friend, familiar and reliable. The rest of the team moved quietly around him, their high-tech equipment allowing them to blend into the shadows. But Jack wasn't worried about blending in. He didn't need to. He wasn't hiding. He was here to make a statement. The Zorithians led the way, their sleek armor glinting in the low light, their plasma rifles raised and ready. Jack wasn't impressed. He had seen enough plasma weapons to last a lifetime, and he knew their limitations. What bothered him was the arrogance of it all. They acted like their shiny toys were the be-all and end-all of combat. Jack didn't care for the glitz. He cared about results, and he had a feeling the Zorithians were going to learn the hard way that there was more to fighting than the latest tech. "Remember, everyone," Brentak whispered over the comms. "We breach, plant, and exfil. Stay sharp." Jack smirked at the order. It wasn't that he didn't respect the Zorithians. Well, maybe a little bit, but their rigid, tactical approach was so predictable. He had been in enough firefights to know that nothing ever went exactly as planned. Plans were made to be broken. It was how you adapted, how you improvised, that determined the outcome. And Jack had been improvising longer than most of these mercenaries had been alive. The mission was simple. Infiltrate the facility, plant the explosives, and get out before the alarms went off. But Jack had a feeling that the before part was going to be a lot trickier than anyone anticipated. The Zorithians were already talking about their escape routes, already discussing what they'd do if they were detected. But Jack didn't think about escape. Not yet, anyway. He didn't need to say much. The team already knew their roles, and there was no need to waste energy on the predictable. But even with all his experience, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just his gut. He trusted that more than anything. But when you've been in as many firefights as Jack, your instincts have a way of speaking to you. It was the quiet before the storm, the heavy silence that told you trouble was waiting. Jack adjusted the strap on his Garand and glanced back at the team. Vrentak and the others were already at the outer wall, scanning for any signs of movement. They were well trained, no doubt about that. But Jack knew they lacked one crucial thing: human intuition. They didn't have the ability to sense danger the way he did. It was a skill that came from years of survival, from facing the odds and pushing through when the rest of the galaxy might have given up. The rest of the crew were a mix of professionals, but there was something about Vrentak that grated on Jack. The Zorithian was competent, sure, but he was cocky, and cockiness often led to mistakes. Jack had seen it happen time and again. Soldiers who relied too much on their gear, too much on the plans, and not enough on their ability to think on their feet. "Keep your heads down," Vrentak ordered. "We don't want to tip off the facility guards." Jack nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. He wasn't worried about the guards. He was worried about the bigger picture. Something in the back of his mind was telling him that this wasn't just about the mission. It wasn't just about planting explosives and making a clean getaway. There was something else going on, and he couldn't put his finger on it yet. His gut told him the Zorithians had miscalculated, but he needed proof. As the team moved deeper into the facility's outer defenses, Jack's mind raced. He'd been a mercenary long enough to know when something didn't add up. The Zorithians were too focused on the task at hand, too sure of their success. They believed they had the upper hand because of their tech. But Jack knew better. Technology didn't always win the fight. Sometimes, it was the old-school approach that turned the tide. The plan called for the team to plant explosives in several key locations throughout the facility. The goal was to destabilize the infrastructure, trigger chaos, and force a retreat. Simple, right? That's what they all thought. But Jack had a feeling it wasn't going to be that easy. He could feel it in the air, the tension that was building up around them. Something was waiting, just beyond the horizon. Something that none of them could predict. The facility loomed ahead, dark and imposing, like a beast waiting to be provoked. It was a fortress, designed to keep out intruders. But Jack didn't believe in fortresses. Fortresses were just another challenge to be overcome, and Jack was more than capable of overcoming challenges. But what worried him wasn't the building. It was the enemy inside. The Zorithians were so focused on the mission that they weren't paying attention to the real threat. He could see the others moving toward the entrance now, their steps light and sure. Vrentak was at the front, always at the front, leading the charge as if he had something to prove. Jack had never been one for bravado, but he understood why Vrentak acted the way he did. Aliens were competitive by nature, and the Zorithians were no different. They liked to prove they were the best. They liked to show off their advanced technology and make the humans feel inferior. Jack didn't need to prove anything. The Garand was all the proof he needed. The team reached the facility's outer gates, and Jack could hear the soft hum of energy shields, the faint sound of mechanical systems working in harmony to keep the fortress intact. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no rush. The job would take as long as it took, and Jack knew that rushing would only get people killed. "Take your positions," Vrentak commanded, snapping Jack out of his thoughts. The Zorithian pointed to a series of windows, along the side of the building. "We'll cover the perimeter." Jack nodded and moved into position, taking cover behind a stack of crates. He didn't need to wait for orders. His role was simple: provide cover when the explosions went off. The rest of the team would handle the planting. But Jack's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't worried about the explosives. He was worried about the bigger picture. The nagging feeling in the back of his mind had only grown stronger. As the Zorithians began to move into place, Jack caught a glimpse of something on the horizon. A flash of movement. It was distant, but it was enough to make his heart race. His instincts kicked into high gear. This wasn't a drill. The team wasn't just infiltrating a facility. They were walking into a trap. He had to warn them. But it was too late. The first explosion went off with a deafening roar, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The team's mission had begun. But Jack knew the real fight was just getting started. The worst part? The Zorithians had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that the old gun Jack carried wasn't just a weapon. It was the only thing that could save them now. The explosion had barely finished echoing through the valley when the real chaos began. Jack Lancaster didn't flinch as chunks of reinforced alloy rained down around him. His eyes were already on the ridge beyond the facility, where movement now stirred beneath the faint shimmer of cloaking fields. Not guards, not security bots. Something worse, something silent and fast, moving with the predatory precision that told Jack one thing. They were professionals, mercs, probably hired by the same slimy bureaucrats funding the Zorithian operation. This was never just a hit-and-run sabotage. It was bait. Vrentak's voice barked over the comms, demanding updates, blaming interference, snapping orders like he could command the laws of physics with enough arrogance. Jack cut the channel off. The last thing he needed was more noise. He adjusted the heavy canvas strap across his chest and unslung the ancient behemoth of a weapon from his back. It gleamed dully under the stars, long, bulky, and completely at odds with the sleek rifles the Zorithians swore by. The anti-tank rifle, human-made, human-tested, and wildly impractical by Galactic standards. But Jack didn't care about Galactic standards. He cared about stopping what was coming. They moved like ghosts, the enemy. No energy signals, no plasma trails, just shadows skimming along the ground. The kind of operators who wore ceramic-coated armor, silent servos, heat-dampening cloaks. They weren't amateurs, and they weren't here to arrest anyone. Jack dropped to one knee behind a crate and leveled the massive rifle. He didn't use scopes. He preferred irons, trusted his own eyes. The first shot kicked like a mule, the sonic boom rippling through the air like thunder. Something downrange exploded in a spray of limbs and sparks. That was no drone. That was flesh and armor. Now they knew where he was. Good. Down the line, the Zorithians were panicking. Plasma bolts lit up the night in erratic bursts, no control, no suppression fire, just noise. Jack stayed calm. His breathing slowed. He found a second target. Another trigger pull. The rifle spat its hate again, and a second mercenary folded in half like a marionette with cut strings. A warning came through a scrambled signal, Vrentak shouting something about reinforcements inbound. Too late for that. The team had maybe 3 minutes before the enemy breached their perimeter. Jack worked fast, methodical, each round from the bolt-action beast dropping another threat before they got too close. But the rifle wasn't a miracle. It was loud, slow to reload, and every shot counted, and they were closing in. One of the Zorithians, a younger grunt named Tolvik, tried to flank. Jack saw him rush past the crates, trying to circle wide with his plasma repeater. He didn't make it 10 feet before a gauss spike impaled his chest. No scream. Just a thud, and he crumpled. Plasma weapons couldn't stop that kind of force, but a human anti-tank round could. That's why Jack was here. The enemy started deploying countermeasures, smoke, jamming fields, even short-range EMP pulses. It made the Zorithians blind and dumb, cutting off their visors, frying their systems. Jack smiled grimly. That's the problem with smart gear. It breaks too easily. The rifle didn't care. No power, no optics, no targeting interface. Just metal, powder, and Jack's finger. He kept firing. 4 more mercs dropped, each one a clean hit. But they kept coming, swarming. Now, they'd gotten close enough to deploy seeker drones. One zipped past his ear, buzzing like a mechanical mosquito. Jack swatted it out of the air with the rifle stock and rolled left, narrowly avoiding a volley of magnetically propelled flechettes. Too close. He ducked behind a bulkhead and reloaded, the heavy steel rounds clinking into place. His back ached. His ears rang. His muscles screamed from the recoil. But his hands were steady. He had done this before. Back on Thaler Prime, on the ice moons, in jungles so dense you couldn't see your squad mate. War didn't change. Just, the toys did. A few Zorithians rallied, firing blindly into the haze. Vrentak was still shouting, still trying to command a situation that had already spiraled into madness. Jack caught sight of him sprinting toward a downed comrade, dragging him behind cover. Maybe he wasn't entirely useless after all, and the explosion tore through the left flank, sending 2 more mercs tumbling end over end. Not Jack's doing. Someone else was fighting back. A second human. Jack recognized the silhouette immediately. Broad shoulders limping slightly, a long-barreled rifle slung low. Teddy Graves, another relic like Jack. They'd fought together years ago in the Ritari insurgency. Teddy had a reputation for being reckless, loud, and entirely too fond of quoting 1980s action movies mid-firefight. Teddy slid into cover beside Jack, grinning like a man who'd just walked into a familiar bar fight. "Thought I heard the bark of your iron mule," he said. "You keep bringing that antique to modern fights?" Jack fired another round. Another body dropped. "It works." Teddy pulled out a grenade, an old fragmentation model, probably from a surplus depot on Earth, and chucked it over the crates. "So do my knees, but they still crack when I sit." The blast cleared out another knot of attackers. The smoke parted just long enough to reveal the full size of the enemy force. Dozens. Maybe more. They weren't just mercenaries. They were contract suppressors, black badge hit teams for hire by the highest bidder. Jack's gut had been right. This wasn't sabotage. It was assassination. He ducked another volley, firing twice in rapid succession. One round cracked a suppressor's chest plate. The next obliterated the skull underneath. "This facility isn't the target," he muttered. "We are," Teddy nodded grimly. "Figures. Zorithians get skittish when humans bring primitive weapons that actually kill people. They mock the rifle," Jack said, chambering another round. "But they don't laugh when their organs are on the floor." The 2 humans held the line. The Zorithians rallied behind them now, understanding, finally, that it wasn't about shiny rifles or perfect formations. It was about surviving. They stopped trying to use their gear and started watching Jack and Teddy. Learning, reacting, firing where the humans aimed, taking cover the way Jack moved. A suppression drone dropped into view. It hovered low, deploying a micro-mortar launcher. Jack barely had time to aim. The round cracked through its hull, igniting its core. The resulting fireball lit the night like a flashbulb. The mercs hesitated. That was their window. Teddy stood, shouting over the din. "They want our heads? They can have our bullets first." Jack didn't smile, but inside, he felt that old fire again. That bone-deep certainty that no matter how far the galaxy expanded, no matter how advanced its armies became, there would always be room for a well-placed bullet. He hoisted the anti-tank rifle onto his shoulder, turned toward the remaining enemy force, and advanced. By the time the second wave arrived, half the suppressors were dead or dying. The rest began to pull back, their lines faltering. Zorithian gunships screamed overhead, finally showing up with support. Vrentak's voice came back over the comms, suddenly full of praise, as if he hadn't just spent 20 minutes panicking in the dirt. Jack didn't respond. He and Teddy stood amid the wreckage, smoke curling around them, the old rifle still warm in Jack's hands. It wasn't over. Not even close. But for now, they had survived. And somewhere out there, whoever had sent these mercs was going to learn a very human lesson. Mock the gun if you want, but laugh too hard, and you'll never hear the shot that ends you. The calm after battle was a lie everyone pretended to believe. Smoldering wreckage littered the canyon floor where charred armor and fused metal stained the cracked earth. Zorithian medics moved between bodies, their gait uncertain, eyes wide, taking instruction from humans for the first time. Jack Lancaster sat beside a half-melted supply crate, bandaging a deep cut on his arm with the precision of a man who had done this 100 times. Beside him, Teddy Graves disassembled his sidearm with the ease of routine, the smell of carbon scoring still clinging to his armor. Neither man spoke for several minutes. They didn't have to. The suppressor team hadn't been a random hit squad. Teddy had pulled a corpse's insignia from the wreckage, an obsidian hex with 7 notches. Untraceable but familiar to anyone who'd worked Black Ops on the fringe. It was the mark of the Silent Contract, a clandestine guild that only accepted jobs sanctioned by Empire-level actors. That detail mattered. It meant this wasn't a rogue operation. Someone inside the Galactic Directorate wanted humans removed, methodically and permanently. Not because of politics, not because of fear, because of potential. Jack flexed his hand. The nerves were slow to respond, a deep ache radiating from the shoulder where recoil had torn through old scar tissue. He looked over at Vrentak, standing stiff near the command post, covered in dust, still pretending he hadn't tried to run halfway through the ambush. The alien wore a blank expression, but Jack could see the calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't stupid. He knew the war had changed tonight. One of the younger Zorithians approached. Female, maybe. It was hard to tell with their bone plate armor. She held out a datapad with trembling hands. "We finished decrypting the fragment found on the lead mercenary," she said. "It's a contract manifest. Names, targets." Jack took the pad. The list wasn't long, but every name on it belonged to a human. Not diplomats, not officers, operators, survivors, veterans, people like Jack, like Teddy, like the ones who didn't wear medals but carried the scars of battles. The Galactic Empire preferred to forget. Near the bottom, highlighted in red, was Jack's own name. Teddy leaned in. "They put a price on your head. They put one on yours, too. Reckon I should feel honored." Jack handed the pad back. "They're not just trying to kill us. They're trying to erase us." Teddy exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the carnage around them. "Means they're scared." That realization settled like lead. The kind of fear that made bureaucrats pay mercenaries to clean house. The kind that saw human resilience not as an asset, but as a threat to the fragile illusion of control. Jack had seen it before. On every colony where humans had been underestimated, dismissed, cornered. And every time they adapted, improvised, fought harder. But now, they weren't just being erased from battlefields. They were being erased from history. A new alert flashed across the camp's broadcast net. Unauthorized movement. 3 separate facilities had gone dark. One of them had housed the last operational human weapons archive in the sector. Another was a civilian station. Families, engineers, no soldiers. The final one was a training site, where retired human veterans instructed alien units in guerrilla tactics. All 3 locations destroyed within the last 12 hours. No survivors. Jack stood. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface it trembled with barely contained fury. "They're not hunting fighters. They're purging culture." Teddy rose. With him. "Then it's time we make this expensive." The Zorithians had begun to rally around them quietly, almost unconsciously. Vrentak tried to assert control, barking orders, attempting to restore protocol. But something had shifted. Authority wasn't in rank anymore. It was in action. And Jack had acted. He called for a recon team, not Zorithian, human-trained. A few stepped forward, ex-special forces, dismissed for insubordination. Now they moved, like wolves behind enemy lines. Jack briefed them with quick, efficient words. Find the origin, trace the contracts, every name, every location, every account. He didn't want revenge. He wanted exposure. Meanwhile, Teddy coordinated a resupply. The rifle had survived, but its rounds were rare, manually manufactured and intentionally difficult to duplicate. But Teddy knew a guy on Gleesh 8, a retired ordnance technician who'd once smuggled entire tanks across demilitarized zones just for sport. They'd get what they needed. They always did. The real fight wasn't going to be in canyons or fields anymore. It would be in back rooms, shadow channels, and forgotten satellites. Jack knew that terrain better than most. He had once disappeared for 3 years between wars, tracing the shell companies that funded child armies on shattered moons. He could do it again. The next few days blurred into momentum. The humans moved like fire through dry grass, igniting, unrest in places long considered pacified. Whispers spread of what had happened in the canyon, of a human with an ancient rifle who stood against a force 10 times his number, of another who laughed while tossing iron grenades like candy at a parade. These stories weren't just morale. They were insurgency fuel. Alien factions once neutral now began to question the Empire's version of events. A small planet near the edge of the Orion Veil broadcast a message, grainy, unpolished, and raw, showing footage of the suppressors dying under rifle fire. If this is primitive, the transmission said, then perhaps primitive is what we need. Jack watched the clip in silence. He recognized the moment. That was the shot that had torn through 3 suppressors at once. The rifle had cracked, so loud it had stunned even the birds. Teddy watched too, arms crossed. Think they're starting to get it? They will, but understanding came at a cost. The moment the stories spread, the contracts escalated. Jack wasn't the only target now. Other humans went missing. A team on Nithros 9 vanished mid-sweep. A convoy escorting refugees through a neutral corridor was found vaporized. And each time, the Empire denied involvement. It became a pattern. Humans died, and bureaucracy answered with shrugs. So Jack stopped asking. He and Teddy built a network, not an army, not yet, but a coalition of the overlooked. Retired snipers, disgraced Marines, engineers who remembered how to build bombs. From scrap and spite, they used Earth's oldest tricks: misdirection, mobility, message discipline. Every op was surgical, no trace. Every target carefully selected. They weren't fighting the Empire. They were fighting its shadow. The rifle became more than a weapon. It became a symbol. Its profile, burned into walls with carbon soot, marked sites of resistance. Locals began calling it the last argument. Jack didn't correct them. One night, weeks later, they intercepted a signal. A high-priority comm ping from a directorate. Vault system, secure, encrypted, desperate. The Empire wasn't just hunting humans anymore. They were asking for terms. Jack didn't respond. Instead, he loaded another round into the rifle. The brass clicked, final and deliberate. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We're not done teaching." The wind howled through the rocks. Somewhere out there, the next ambush was already being planned. But for now, they had ground. They had proof. They had each other. And they had the one thing the Empire couldn't predict. Resolve, the kind that didn't die quietly, the kind that carried a rifle.